Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to Warzone in Depth. In today's episode, I want to talk about the new C58 Close Quarters Combat Assault Rifle. While this gun was initially overlooked, I think it's actually very good and potentially good enough to bring back the double AR meta. As many of you are very aware, the double AR meta took a huge hit with the barrel reworks and the subsequent FFAR and Fara nerfs. The FFAR and Fara got significant nerfs to their handling and slowed them down. The barrel reworks made it where the Spetsnaz and Task Force barrels don't just give a bunch of velocity and range and mobility on top of that. In general, the barrel reworks made it to where the assault rifles, if you use any barrel at all, is going to have significantly less mobility and will be more difficult to use. I think that Raven just generally doesn't like the idea of us using assault rifles as submachine guns. In the current meta, you're really looking only at the Groza and the Cold War AK-47 to be good close quarters combat ARs, but they both kick a lot and they can be hard to use because of the iron sights and gun shake and a few little quirks of those weapons. But the new C58 is an excellent weapon for the double AR strategy. I was kind of looking at this weapon stats and I was kind of trying to figure out where it really fits in because its close quarters damage is so great, and I wondered if I could take advantage of that damage and make it fast enough to be a good SMG replacement. So let's start off with the damage and I'll kind of lead you along this journey. It'll deal 59 to 55 damage for headshots, which is nice. Chest shots is 44 to 40, guts is 40 to 37, and limbs is 37 to 40. You will note that this is pretty significant damage for an assault rifle. The chest and guts damage, or close quarters anyway, is very impressive. The important part to focus on this chart is these first set of numbers because this is your maximum or close quarters combat damage. And when you take a look at this, the headshots are nice, the chest shots are nice, and the gut shots aren't bad. It maintains a healthy amount of damage at almost any region that you're going to hit people. The limbs perhaps not so great. And even at long range, it doesn't drop off too much, but we're not going to be using this for long range. I think that's a lot of damage per shot, and it's more damage per shot than most weapons that you're going to use in Warzone. The rate of fire on this weapon, however, is kind of slow at 533 rounds per minute. Thankfully, it's fully automatic, but that does mean it's very unforgiving. If you miss a shot or multiple shots, your time to kill is going to jump up rapidly for each miss, and in my experience, it's just easy to beam or laser people with weapons that shoot incredibly fast because you never have the opportunity to overswipe or have somebody kind of slip between your bullets. So the rate of fire on this one is very slow. However, when you take the very high damage with this rate of fire, you'll get pretty nice time to kill values. If you're getting all headshots, it's 424 milliseconds, which is good. The chest shots is what we're really interested in today, which is 542 milliseconds. The gut shot is a little bit rough at 651. That's not really something you want to be going for. You want to be getting those nice juicy upper chest shots. And if you're landing them, that 542 milliseconds puts you in a same time to kill category of something like the Modern Warfare MP5. It's not tremendously worse than the Cold War AK, so it's kind of in that upper crust of TTK. In my opinion, this makes the time to kill very competitive with submachine guns and other assault rifles, especially since with the subsequent reworks, the majority of the guns do require those upper chest shots. There's not a lot of guns in the game now that you can get limb and just body shots and the time to kill is all the same, so that aspect of the comparison kind of gets peeled away. Taking a look at some popular close quarters combat assault rifles, I'm going to compare the C58 to the Fara and the Groza with this nice little chart from True Game Data. He is a real hero in our community, and you'll see that the C58 kills faster than all of these weapons at almost every range except for that little overlap zone there in medium range. But more importantly, it kills significantly faster than the Fara up close and a little bit faster than the Groza up close as well, which I was kind of surprised by. However, if you compare it to the Cold War AK-47, you will see that the C58 lags behind a little bit and kills about 50 milliseconds or roughly 2.5 frames slower than the Cold War AK-47. However, it's still kind of same ballpark. And on the topic of same ballpark, if you compare this to the Modern Warfare MP5, you'll see that it's extremely similar to that, almost identical up to about 10 meters, and then is immediately better than the Modern Warfare MP5. It's just the most popular and most used SMG I can think of, so I think it's excellent for comparison here. So given that information, you can see that while the C58 may not technically be the fastest killing, most shreddingest thing in the game, it is in a very healthy category near the top of time to kill weapons and outperforms quite a few popular ones. But that's not all with this weapon. We need to talk about its handling properties as well. The Cold War AK-47 and the Groza both have faster aim down sights times at 267 and the Groza at a crazy 221 milliseconds, whereas the C58 is going to be notably slower at 292 milliseconds. Not crazy slower than the AK, but a lot slower than the Groza, so that's not a good look for this weapon. All three of those weapons have the same sprint out time and the same tac sprint out time, so there's not really any point in comparing that. The C58 does also have a slightly slower base movement speed and a slightly slower base aim down sight strafing or movement speed than those other two, so its handling properties aren't looking good and it's making it not very good for the close quarters meta. On top of that, it's got 5 less rounds of ammo at any magazine level, especially the base mags are kind of brutal, so right now you're probably thinking these numbers don't look good, but 2 handling properties will make up for all of it. I mean, honestly, just looking at it like that, you would say, okay, it's got a decent time to kill, but it kind of stinks at everything else. Why wouldn't I just use the Groza or the AK? Well, this gun can go do 2 things that those weapons cannot. Number 1 is that it has very low recoil that is mostly vertical. That is not something that you can say for the Groza or the AK. Both of those are very high recoil weapons, and the recoil tends to be very horizontal and very difficult to control, so you won't hit your shots. And the C58 advantage number 2 is that the iron sights are fairly clean and easy to use. I don't really like running iron sights. For many of you that have followed in depth for a long time, you know I'm kind of a red dot addict. However, the C58 kind of works for me, whereas the Cold War AK-47, I find the sights to be very tiny, and with the Groza, it's got the right idea going on with the middle bar, but the gun shake and animation is so extreme and so wobbly, I really struggle to see what I'm shooting at with the Groza. So we have a weapon that has very low recoil, so we don't have to fool with the recoil, and a weapon that has clean iron sights, so we might not need a dot sight. That makes it very easy to kit for, since it doesn't have many truly required or must-have kind of attachments. So let me show you the attachments that I'm running on it. We'll go into Gunsmith here and take a quick look. I like running the basic suppressor, kind of treating it like an SMG. You get a ton of benefits now for a whole bunch of stuff we're going to go over in a minute with only a little bit of range penalty. The agency suppressor hurts your ADS time and aiming stability, which we kind of need. I'm just treating it like an SMG. I use the takedown barrel to give myself effective range and minimize all horizontal recoil. I just kind of reduce that near down to 0. The next thing I'm going to run is the Raider stock, which gives me a ton of good handling attributes like sprint to fire time and a variety of like strafing and walking movement speed with a huge hip fire penalty. You want to run the Stanag 55 round mags because the magazine is miserable and you want as many rounds as you can possibly get. We'll talk about that one stat-wise in just a moment. And then at this point, you kind of have a choice to run any of the 4 grips. You can run speed grips. The basic one just cuts a little horizontal recoil. That's what I've been working on. The field agent grip I feel slows me down too much, so I've been kind of avoiding that. And if you don't like the 4 grips, if you feel that you're good at controlling recoil and you don't need any of these for whatever reason, you don't need the speed or control, well, you can kind of put an optic on the gun if you want. I would personally recommend one of the really nice Microflex LED sights, maybe a 2X since you're going to be using it in close quarters combat, but I like it with the basic 4 grip and those attachments. So let's talk about what all these attachments do to the gun. Off the top of my head, I think it's a half frame of ADS, a whole frame of sprint out, and about 10% bonus bullet velocity. You do lose a little bit of range and you stay off the radar. The takedown barrel is part of the rework. It gives you 35% range, which is something that's very important since you're using this in close to medium range combat. You want to maintain that maximum time to, or minimum time to kill as far out as possible, and it reduces your horizontal recoil, also basically negating the range penalty and giving you a little bonus over the suppressor. So your gun is going to jump left and right a lot less, and you can just easily fight the vertical recoil. The takedown barrel will also make your hip fire a lot worse, about 20% wider, but we're not going to be hip firing this thing. This is not designed to be a hip fire weapon. This is an in-your-face, aim-down sight, strafe-around kind of weapon. The Raider stock does a whole lot of stuff to your weapon, but I'm going to try to condense it as much as possible here. It'll give you 5 to 7 frames faster of sprint out time, which is that's 5 normal and 7 if you're doing the full tac sprint where you pick your gun up. That's probably its biggest benefit. You just sprint out to combat way faster, which is great for a close quarters combat weapon. You get about 39% faster strafing speed, which is only going to allow you to check corners really easily and just kind of zoom around the map. However, it says plus 60% hip fire. That is 60% wider hip fire. It makes your hip fire awful, and it even stacks with the other barrel, so your hip fire is going to be really terrible when you put the Raider stock on there, but you're going to be able to ADS and strafe around really easily. The 55 round drum mags are generally the best performing mags overall. I've tested this throughout a couple of in-depth episodes, and every single time the drum mags come back best for like optimal or least penalty for most bullets kind of thing. If you want to go for like 55 round fast mags, you tend to pick up a little bit more aim down sights time penalty, which I'm not a fan of. And then finally at the end, it's your choice between a foregrip or a red dot sight. I like the basic foregrip. I'm going to take my recoil down to 0. If you're going to use this even closer, you can go for like the bruiser, or I think it's the patrol grip, to gain extra mobility. Not really a fan of those. A lot of you gravitate toward the last 2 grips, which will just massively cut the recoil and make the gun feel much easier to use, but losing that mobility is kind of brutal. The red dot sight, I decided not to go with, for a reason here. I'm just going to kind of show you that now. So this is the C58 hitting a medium range target, and you'll notice that it's pretty clear, but when I strafe, it'll bobble side to side a little bit. It's a little bit annoying, but overall, I find the iron sights to be relatively clear and easy to use, and even in the middle of the combat, the side to side wobble isn't bothering me too much. Now let's compare that to the red dot sight. Interestingly, the red dot sight doesn't cover the lower part of the foresight, so I still see part of the gun down there, and it's actually blocking my God, what a Freudian slip, blocking the lower part of the body. So if I had to pull down, it would actually be a little bit more difficult for me to see my target. And for that little bit of benefit and still not the clearest sights, red dot just really isn't the thing for me. So after all of these attachments, let's talk about the net results you get on the weapon. You're going to get much less horizontal recoil. It's a little bit hard to quantify, but it just makes the weapon easier to use. You're going to get a small 15% bonus to your range to keep it competitive against some of the other ARs and SMGs. You're going to get roughly 25% less sprint out time, depending on if you're doing tac sprint or regular sprint, which is an actual godsend. You're going to get plus 10% bullet velocity, and your net benefit of strafing is 30 to 39% strafing speed. It's a little bit hard to quantify this as well, but you do get a significant bonus to your strafing speed when you're aiming down sights, which you will feel, and you'll be able to move faster while shooting, which is good when you're pushing buildings. The downsides are a slight increase in your aim down sights time of roughly 2 frames, and most importantly, the biggest downside is that your hip fire is miserable. Your hip fire is going to be just something that you don't even want to attempt. This is going to be an ADS or bust weapon, but that's kind of how people were using the Fara and the Cold War AK, so I don't really see a massive downside to that. And at the end of all of this, you have a weapon with a competitive time to kill. It's got good clear iron sights, better than its competitors. Since you don't have to put certain attachments on it, it maintains a high mobility despite having a bad mobility starting point, and relatively big mags at 55. You can clear people out, and since you're dealing a lot of damage per shot, 55 round mags aren't too bad because you have a lot of efficiency with your bullets. The downside is you just can't hip fire with it, and you can't use it at too extreme of a range. That's one thing that I feel like it's really weak against compared to the original like launch Fara. The Fara was a weapon you could build for close quarters combat and still nail people pretty well at long ranges with. This one you can't. If you're going to build the C58 for close quarters, you need to keep it close quarters because it's not really going to work at hardly any other range, or not past medium. It's not going to be quite as easy to use as the old Fara. So my opinion on this weapon is that the C58, when kitted this way, is not better than the original FFAR, it's not better than the launch Fara, and it's not better than the Cold War AK-47 pre-barrel nerf. However, I think it's better than all of those now, and it's in the same ballpark as the Groza, which performs a similar function. Now, the Groza is a weapon that kills at roughly the same amount of time, and it has much better handling attributes for ADS and that kind of stuff, but its recoil is way more awkward and way more difficult to control almost no matter what you put on it. So in all practical terms, you're not going to be landing enough shots with the Groza for it to outperform the C58 in most of my experiences. And personally, after using this for 2 days, I tried it in sort of a long range build, which you may have seen some gameplay of, and the close range build, I kind of have a soft spot for the C58. It isn't the most amazing statistical weapon for TTK or for handling, but it hits a really nice balance of doing almost everything. It's got good time to kill, you can kit it to have good handling, you can kit it to be a laser if you really want to, and it has consistently performed well for me, and I feel comfortable recommending that for you. Well guys, that's all for this episode of In Depth. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.